This is Jeff Boggs, and this is the Week 7 lecture for Geography and Tourism Studies 2P21. As you may or may not recall, last week we introduced 3 common features of quantitative analysis. So we talked about measures of, we first talked about histograms, which can be used to describe more generally the shape of the distribution of our data, at least for interval and ratio level data. We also talked about measures of central tendency, which kind of tell us where the center of our data are. And then we talked about measures of dispersion, which help us understand how spread out are the observations we have around whatever the middle of the data set is. And then we talked about a couple of different ways to then sort of use these to either just describe or to compare or to look for associations between variables. And to help do that, I made use of some data on a handout referred to as the railroad scenario handout or something to that effect. Whereas last week we focused on really common techniques or procedures that are used in lots of different kinds of quantitative analysis, this week I want to introduce and demonstrate. Actually, the demonstration will come in a slightly different video, but I want to talk about a process called coding, C-O-D-I-N-G, which is, I would argue, is the core task in any kind of qualitative analysis. And as you recall, we're making use of Spickard's book, and he has 6 steps. The first being develop a good research question. Then the second, choose a corresponding logical structure, of which there were 10 that he identified. Identify the type of data that you need. He identified 14 kinds of data. And then he says we should pick a data collection method. So how are we going to collect the data that we need to answer our research question given our logical structure? And there were 12. He identified broad data collection methods. We are then going to choose our site and our sampling strategy. So, what is the place that we are interested in examining, or where are the people, or where are the things that we are interested in examining, and also where are the data for those, because they're not always in the same place. And then discuss a sampling strategy, of which he talks about probability samples and non-probability samples, sometimes also called random versus non-random samples, that are then used always to select observations or to get observations from the population that you're interested in. And the population can be living things like ducks or people, or it could be non-living things like businesses or buildings or alluvial deposits. Spickard's 6th step then is to pick a data analysis method. So last week we began talking about data analysis methods by examining some really foundational or basic procedures that are used in all kinds of quantitative analysis, in which we'll often then build on those. But this week we're going to talk instead about a data analysis method that relies, or a step in many of these qualitative data analysis methods. And that step, again, is coding, C-O-D-I-N-G. You'll recall from last week's lecture that there are many kinds of non-numeric or non-quantitative data. So there is text, which could be anything from novels to advertisements to graffiti. There's speech. Actually, if we think about text, text messages are an example of text. Email is an example of text, right? So anything that is the written word. Speech then corresponds to or refers to interviews, telephone conversations, small talk that people make with their snuggle bunny, whoever their snuggle buddy might be, at the early hours of the morning. There's all kinds of speech, even the speech that we might have with our pets, right? So our pet might look at us and, occasionally recognize their own name, but we still have speech with pets. So I would argue that even might be able to fall into here. And then the third kind of non-numeric data are visual patterns. So various kinds of art, whether it be a painting or a sculpture or a mandala made out of sand. Maps actually have visual patterns as well, and maps are amenable to content analysis. So they're amenable to being coded for the features that they contain. What else? Graffiti also, will often have visual patterns in it, in the sense that it's not text, but instead it's, a drawing of, I don't know, a flop-eared rabbit or whatever. In Chapter 6 of Spickard, he makes this distinction between sort of two approaches for conducting qualitative analysis. So the first, he argues, is a respondent-centered analysis in which you are focusing on things that the respondents already know and aren't looking for anything deeper. You're often taking them at their face value, and often you're trying to understand the respondent's experience as they describe the experience. The other approach that he identifies is something called a researcher-centered analysis. And with researcher-centered analysis, this focuses on patterns that are really below the respondent's level of awareness. So these are hidden patterns. So for researcher-centered analysis, this might, for instance, look at, I guess an example of this might be, let's imagine a case where you have an HR department and they seem to always hire people from, the same part of the country or the same country or maybe even from the same school. Let's go with that. Or from a small number of schools, regardless of the fact that it seems like there may well be other qualified candidates, but because they don't meet those other criteria, they're not getting hired. And then also imagine that the HR people argue that they treat everyone the same in their hiring and that they, sincerely seem to believe that as well. I mean, they may not sincerely believe it, but for the sake of argument, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. And so it's possible then that they are unaware of, systematic ways they respond to one group over another group. That then, identifying, so perhaps, taping the interview process and then studying the interview process to see how the interviewer, when they're interviewing people for a position, they're interviewing people for a job, seeing if are there ways that they systematically treat one group that's different from how they treat another group. And, do we see this in their speech patterns or in their body language, for instance? That might be an example of a way that we would get at hidden patterns. So patterns that are below the respondent's awareness. This first version, respondent-centered analysis, you want to use that when you actually are concerned with, what do the interview subjects or the focus group subjects, what do they think is happening? That's when you want to use that. So when you're interested in what they think is happening, it may not be what's really happening, but what do they think is happening? Whereas researcher-centered analysis is used to understand what is actually happening. So there's this slight distinction here, right? So we can think that one thing is happening when it's really not. So sometimes we do things and think something's happening, but it is, and it's not actually happening. Sometimes I get this when I proffer advice to my child, and she'll say, "You think that you're being helpful, but you're not, Daddy," right? So that's kind of a distinction there. And just to make sure this point is clear, my argument is that the activity that's most common to any kind of qualitative analysis is always, put an L in there, is always coding, C-O-D-I-N-G. And that's why we're covering it today, because regardless of whatever kind of qualitative analysis you're going to do, coding, which essentially is a process of looking for patterns, is something that you will have to do. And it might be that when you hear the word coding, you think of computers or BASIC or C++ or one of hundreds of other programming languages, which is certainly, that's a legitimate use of the term. But in this particular context, when I say coding, C-O-D-I-N-G, what I mean is that I'm talking about a process of identifying patterns in your data. And then when you identify a pattern, then you apply a name or a code to that pattern so that you can then see it when it happens, as well as, see it when it doesn't happen and see how frequent it is. And, does one code often occur with another code? So are there co-occurrences of coding or co-occurrences of codes? Bearing in mind what we've just talked about with regards to respondent versus researcher-focused approaches, we can also use that way of thinking about a research question to help inform our coding procedure. So our research question could be something like, in this case, how does someone's sense of place change after their house burns down? This means, among other things, that our sample will have to consist of people whose houses have burnt down. And then maybe you'll compare them to people whose houses were instead destroyed by an earthquake or a tsunami, or not at all, not have another group at all. In any case, our question then is about, how does one's sense of place change after one's house burns down? And if we're primarily interested in just understanding the experiences of the people who lost their house, we'll probably rely on something that's called internal or sometimes inductive coding. And by calling it inductive, this points to inductive logic, where we look at lots of observations and then from those pull patterns out of those. Sometimes internal coding, if it's not called inductive coding, might get called open coding. I've occasionally seen it called free, F-R-E-E, coding as well. We could have a research question that's more of a researcher-centered analysis question. So if we think of burning houses, for that, we might actually still be able to ask the same research question. This is an interesting thing that can happen here. So how does one's sense of place change after one's house is burnt down? And in this case, we might instead be interested in using external, sometimes called deductive coding. And I've seen fewer other names for this kind of coding. But in this second case, you as a researcher already have some categories in mind for how you will code. So one of the codes in this case might be severity of house destruction, or loss of life. Was there loss of life? Was there not loss of life? To see if there are systematic patterns in, if your house burns down, and heaven forbid that happened, but on top of that, if everyone else in the house dies in the fire, how much more might that affect your sense of place than in the case where, it's just a kitchen fire and your house has burnt and it's technically been, condemned, and the insurance company just pays it out because the fire is bad enough and there's smoke damage, but it's not actually the entire house really burnt down and no one died, right? So in that case, the researcher might be interested in understanding how the severity of the fire affects people's attachment to place or their sense of place. In a lot of cases, you'll have research questions that actually can benefit from both internal and external coding. A lot of times when I've had to code stuff, I've gone this route where I have a suspicion that based on the kinds of questions we asked, I was interested in seeing if something was or was not reported and how it was reported. So those things might give me some ideas for codes that I would already come up with beforehand. And so often these come from my literature review. But also, it's good to have internal or open or inductive coding to see if there's other things that arise that you hadn't thought about before you started the research. In your proposal, if you're conducting qualitative analysis, you'll want to say a bit about, whether what you're doing is more respondent-centered analysis or researcher-centered analysis. And in both of those cases, then, would you mainly use one kind of coding or both kinds of coding? And if so, why? It'd be useful to have a justification for that. But, as you're writing your methodology section in your proposal, you want to keep this in mind if you are conducting any kind of qualitative research. Let's expand on internal or inductive coding. This is pretty normal or customary when you have respondent-centered analysis. I think Spickard might refer to it as open coding. So AKA, it just means also known as, right? It's an acronym. All right, so open coding is generally associated with respondent-centered analysis because you actually care about what your respondents are talking about. Care may not quite be the right word, but that you're interested in their experience of whatever it is that you're interviewing them about. Or if it's a newspaper article, you're interested in how house fires are characterized in newspaper articles. And maybe does that vary by location within a city, right? Or does that vary by the characteristics of who it is, right? So is it, somebody's sweet old grandmother, or a person who's at least characterized as someone's sweet old grandmother? Or are they, the people who suffer the house fire, are they somehow seen as, less worthy of sympathy? So I guess, and actually that kind of question actually starts to then move us into why we would want to do deductive coding. But let's stop there for now and return here back to internal or inductive coding. So the point is that you want to use this if answering your research question requires actually understanding your respondents' reported opinions, beliefs, and thoughts. See, you're never going to know, keep this in mind, you're never going to know if they're really telling you the truth or not. And you're also never going to know, so someone might be telling you something that they think is true, but that may not be true, right? So I've met people who certainly believe that there are aliens, which doesn't strike me as all that far-fetched, but that there are aliens that have come to Earth and spoken to them in particular. I find that way more far-fetched, right? So probably in the universe there are other life forms, intelligent life forms. Whether they're ever going to make it to Earth or not in our lifetime or during human civilization at all, that's a completely different question. So, but that, how did I get on that segue? Well, let's stop that segue. So I guess the point there was that you want to be aware that you're interested when you're using this in reported opinions, beliefs, and thoughts. And often you're taking these at face value. And you're not taking them to be truth with a capital T. You're taking them to be, this is what so-and-so reported to me on such and such a date. And because we can never really know if someone's telling the truth or not, actually we can sometimes know that, not always. And because people can often misremember things and think that they're telling the truth when they're actually not, but they're not actively lying. Instead, they're just misremembering. Because of all these kinds of problems with human memory, we are going to stick with saying this is what was reported to us. And based on that, we are going to proceed with the caveat that this is what was reported to us. We are not necessarily interested in whether this was factually true or not. All right. And in this case, the codes, they emerge out of the data a posteriori, which is, I think of it as after the fact. But it basically means it emerges, I think more literally, it's taken often to mean from experience. This is a term that sometimes gets used in philosophy, and it's possible that in your own readings you might have seen people make reference to either the phrase a posteriori, it's Latin, and if you didn't see that, it's very likely that you have seen someone use the term a priori. So this is a term that's even more common. Let's just briefly talk about this. So a posteriori, I guess, literally translates as from the latter, but it is taken to mean in philosophical terms, so I guess in epistemological terms of how do we know, it's derived from experience. So in this case, it's derived from our reading or listening to of the interviews or the conversations or reading the newspaper articles, but it's taken from our experience of having sort of read and or otherwise worked through this data that we have collected. Whereas a priori is from the earlier, literally, but in philosophy it means that it's, we know this because it's deduced from theory or first principles, which is if you've ever done proofs in geometry, that is a form of sort of a priori knowing, so that you have deduction from theory or from first principles. Is like formally what that means. In practice, what that means is that we often just use the literature review and it suggests that we're likely to see this thing or that thing, and then we pay attention to whether that really happens. Okay, that is enough on internal coding. Let's now turn to external, or sometimes called deductive coding. This, as I noted a couple of slides ago, is customary. It's normal in researcher-centered analysis. And it's used especially when answering your research question requires uncovering hidden patterns. And so in this case, the respondent's opinions, beliefs, and so on may not actually be what you're interested in, so much as the things that are unspoken or that occur during slips of phrasing or are otherwise, you might be interested in where do contradictions occur and how do they, in people's logic. So I hear this a lot from people who profess to be libertarians and yet work for the government. So on the one hand, they say they want a smaller state, and yet on the other hand, they work for the state. And that is a contradiction in my mind, right? So we might actually be interested in identifying contradictions that are below the surface of, our respondents' thinking. In this case, and this is really the key point, is that your codes, they're developed before the data is collected. So they're developed a priori, if we use the fancy Latin phrase from the previous page. And they also will tend to more rigidly shape how the data are collected because you will ask particular kinds of questions that you think will then allow you to apply a particular code in its different range of possible variability within that code. There's an additional kind of coding that you will come across if you read up a little bit on coding. I can't remember if Spickard actually talks about it. I don't think he does. But axial coding is something that you do after you've completed either inductive or deductive coding or both of those. And so axial coding is something that comes afterwards. And axial coding, I don't see it in his subject index, so I don't think he talks about it. Axial coding looks for kind of connections between different codes and to see if a particular code happens systematically. So this isn't so much a geography or tourism studies example, but in terms of, say, linguistics, often when the Odyssey, like an ancient Greek poem, is translated into English, Odysseus, or sometimes he's called Ulysses, is often referred to as brave Ulysses, brave Odysseus, and that those two phrases always come together. So those two words come together so that brave and Odysseus always go together. So it might then be useful in that case, to see if, how is brave Odysseus portrayed, every time, like in the, next follow of the next couple of sentences after he's introduced as or referred to as brave Odysseus. So, it might be that often when we see brave Odysseus, then brave Odysseus is set up for a potentially fearful situation, right? So they just got to deal with some Cyclops, or, he has to, save his crew from the sirens by stopping their ears with wax or what have you. So axial coding then looks for relations between already existing codes. And so you could think of that as kind of a second level of coding. So it identifies, some people would say, co-occurrences of codes. So brave Ulysses is a code, or, it's a, I guess in that case, it's the protagonist of the poem, really. Or at least in the 21st century, I would think of him as the protagonist. So it's Brave Ulysses. And so one of the codes is protagonist. So is, identified the protagonist. And then maybe even, within that code for protagonist, there is underneath that, is it brave? Is it noble? Is it something else? Because there are a couple of adjectives that often get used to describe Ulysses. But then, when do those codes appear in relation to what follows next? So is it a tribulation? Is it some kind of happy event? Is it, something that's probably going to lead to his crew getting killed? And so there are different ways to, I guess in that particular instance, to think about potential co-occurrences. So the point here, after I'm blathering on about Ulysses, is that the co-occurrence represents a systematic relation between these codes. So that means that one code tends, maybe not always, but very often will happen with another code. That's really the point here about a systematic relation. At the same time, this also could be that, whenever this code appears, this other code never appears. So we could be looking at both, the presence of a systematic relation or its absence, if it's like systematically always absent. And this can be used to find unobserved patterns, so patterns that people haven't thought about. And especially didn't think about during their first round of coding when they were conducting either either inductive or deductive coding. And when I say first round of coding, I actually mean a bunch of rounds of coding, because when you read about how to code, people will frequently write about how you don't just go through your data once, you go through it multiple times. We'll get to that later. An example might be, for axial coding, might be, what are the adjectives that are used to describe particular breeds of dogs? In my mind, vicious and Chihuahua frequently go together. So we have this adjective that describes vicious and Chihuahua. And so Chihuahuas tend to be, in my experience, inbred, not very clever dogs who are not disciplined very well. And because, and this is a problem with small dogs generally, is that people have small dogs, they're too lazy to discipline them, and so the dogs run riot over everyone, and Chihuahuas seem the worst about it, and will then are the most likely to bite people. My dad had a bunch of Chihuahuas at one time. That's another story, and as a kid, I never thought he would have Chihuahuas, but actually it's what happens when you have grandkids, evidently, because they weren't his, they were his grandkids' Chihuahuas. But I digress. And then Labrador Retrievers are another kind of dog, which is larger, and is often portrayed in North America as a pretty good dog to have as a family pet. I mean, in my experience, Labrador Retrievers seem to be fairly sweet, but again, that's anecdotal. That is not based on a systematic survey, or it's just based on my experience dealing with dogs over 50 years. And that it might be that when people talk about Labrador Retrievers, maybe goofy, or I suppose faithful, or tolerant, are words that are often associated, often found alongside the phrase Labrador Retriever. So finding those kinds of relations then provides an example of, I guess, how we might perform axial coding, or what it looks like. In Chapter 6, Spickard provides an example of coding, and in this example, he is talking about a study from organizational studies. So basically, those organizational studies departments are often found in business schools, but they usually combined a combination of psychology and sociology and perhaps economics, but actually mainly a lot of like sociology and psychology to understand how organizations perform in the real world. And so in his example, around page 140 in the textbook, at least the version I'm using, I think it's from 2017 or thereabouts, he has a research question, or the research question that motivated the original authors that and then he describes the research, which then is something that he really does from throughout the rest of the book, which is one of the things I like about this book. So in this case, he has identified the research question as what makes for a good place to work. So a good place to work can mean different things to different people. So these scholars are exploring this topic. So in this, these scholars are drawing on organizational theory to inform their research. So they're operating within a particular field. And it could very well be that if you're a tourism studies student or even an economic geographer, you'll have come across organizational theory in some of your courses. So because it's used to explain how both public, private, and nonprofit organizations tend to behave. And again, as I said, it's kind of rooted in a combination of sociology, political science, psychology, and to some degree economics. And occasionally there's geographers that will write in that area as well, or get jobs in org theory departments. So for this, we have both respondent-centered and researcher-centered analysis. So this means that he's using both, or this example is using both inductive and deductive approaches to coding. So on the one hand, with respondent-centered coding, not coating, like a coat of paint, but coding, like what we're doing here. So with the D, so with respondent-centered coding, you're sort of letting the data speak to you, whereas with researcher-centered analysis, so with deductive coding that's going along with that, we are imposing categories or looking for categories from the start, and that we've actually thought through these categories before we collected the data. So if in your research proposal for this course, you say that you are going to use deductive coding, then you will want to say a little bit about what are the likely codes that you would use. And that those would then be related back to either things that you identified in your literature review or your synthesis from that. And that you're always coding to help you answer, ultimately to help you answer your research question. So you don't want to be like me and go off on some crazy tangent where, let's say for the sake of argument, 50 of your interview subjects all talked about dogs and you really focused on that. If my research question was what makes for a good place to work, I mean, I guess one of the things that could make a good place to work is that it allows you to bring in your dogs. However, for people that have dog allergies, that would actually not be a good place to work. Or for people that grew up in countries where dogs tend to be more working animals, and it might be well used by security forces to bite protesters, people from countries like that have a more suspicious position towards dogs. So you want to keep in mind, as you're coding, what is your ultimate goal for this, and not go off on crazy tangents like I do. And what he's doing here is that he's using interviews to identify or to collect data on deeply held beliefs and reports of experiences, right? So deeply held beliefs, the only way you're really going to get at those is through interviews or in some cases, archival information will reveal this as well, especially if you find, someone's personal diary or, their personal journal that's written for them and not for another audience. So we might think of, other kinds of journals are things like ship's logs. So it could very well be that a captain who's piloting a ship, or not piloting, who's commanding a ship, keeps a log, but it may very well be that what they put in the log is not every personal thought that they have, but only things that are relevant for doing their job and possibly shielding them from claims of impropriety or malfeasance at a later date, right? Which then makes me wonder, did pirate ships ever have logs? Because they're all into malfeasance and impropriety. Anyway, we'll skip that. So he's using these interviews to collect data on deeply held beliefs and reports of experiences. And in your own proposal, you'll want to tell us, what are you collecting data on? Like in these general categories that Spickard is making use of. Though granted, if you are doing something that's more physical geography based, then you'll have a narrower range of topics to choose from, or not topics, I guess, ways to collect those data, usually detached observation, sometimes also archival records. But in those cases, you should definitely get in touch with me and talk to me if you have questions about that. Here we have, and I really like Spickard for including these kinds of tables because I think these are useful models for students and other researchers to emulate as they're thinking about why they're asking particular questions. What we have here is a sample coding scheme that tries to understand factors making for a good place to work. And you'll notice across the top category is a term that says, actually now I should have done this before, let me plug in this tablet. Hopefully it doesn't go crazy. Yeah, so what we have here is up at the top, factors identified in the literature. This tells me right here, actually let's go with this. So this bit right up here, factors identified in the literature, that tells me this is going to help us think about, or it's going to help us identify deductive codes. So, because remember, we come up with these codes, you come up with deductive codes before you collect your data. And this also then is why the lit review is such an awesome thing. So we see here that in the literature, there were things, so in the lit review, you would imagine, looked at literature that describes what makes a place a good place to work. Some of that got at aspects of the job. Let me get rid of that, make that red. So aspects of the job. Other got at, and so for aspects of the job, the literature, so this could actually be a theme, right? If we think in terms of our lit reviews and your lit review assignment, and then it's got kind of sub-themes. So one of which is, does the job actually use the skills that the person has? Because sometimes people get jobs that don't use the skills that they have. And generally, it's thought that if you get a job that uses a skill you have, you're often going to feel more appreciated or more, comfortable in that job. You're more likely to think well about that job. I imagine there's exceptions, right? So if you were, heaven forbid, an executioner in the 16th century France, you might have very good skills at lopping off people's heads from their necks, but may feel somewhat ambivalent about the fact that it is your job. Anyway, that's a bit morbid. So another sub-theme might be, does the job provide opportunities for growth? So here they say job provides growth, job uses skills, job provides growth, and then there might be some others, right? So other aspects might be, never works weekends, or maybe more broadly scheduling or overtime or something like that. The second theme then is organizational structure. So that's not about the job, but it's about the organization that the job takes place within. So the first is there a clear chain of command? Basically, do you know who your boss is? And also, do you perhaps how much wiggle room do you have to go about performing your tasks? That might well fall in there as well. I mean, another thing that can happen is that sometimes people will have multiple bosses, and my understanding is that that can be a particular headache if the bosses are not all on the same page, because then they can make an individual's work life quite difficult as they're sort of countermanding each other's orders. So that's where a clear chain of command can be nice. So where it's clear that who definitely is your boss and who are your underlings, if you have anybody that works for you or not. Another sub-theme within organizational structure is that the structure aids the workflow. And so for this, I believe they're getting more at the fact that sometimes organizations can have departments that will work at cross purposes to each other. That generally makes your life more difficult. And then sometimes organizations will have departments that work well together, and then which makes your life easier as well as a worker. Makes it easier to know what you're supposed to do and to actually do that work. And then organizational culture is, how does work take place in that particular organization? So there are, some organizations are very rigid. So if you think of like the military, it's fairly rigid in how the culture is structured. But that might well fit with somebody's personality. And then there are other organizations that where people are allowed lots of free reign as long as they get results. And that's a very different sort of organizational culture, and from one that's really rigid, where everything is clearly laid out and you have to follow particular sets of procedures to the letter, or you'll be reprimanded. And so it could be that the culture matches or doesn't match with the respondent's personal, like the way they like to live their life, right? This G gets at whether that style is stable. So it can be that in organizations, especially those who make use of consultants, that every couple of years it might be that the firm is shaken up, the organization is shaken up because everything's being restructured. So who your boss is has now changed. You're in a new department, even though technically you're still doing the same job. And if you're in a organization that suffers the whims of fads of how to run a business, you may not like that, and you might actually just prefer that every year things are pretty stable in what you can expect. So if you are supposed to wear a tie to work or nice shoes, that it always stays that way, right? It might be that you don't want it to go, oh, well, every day is like casual Friday, or actually every day is really a casual Friday instead of some bogus business casual Friday. And it might be that, an individual as a worker finds that distressing if for no other reason than the benefit of, wearing a tie and nice shoes as in dress shoes, not tennis shoes, and a jacket might be that it's actually easier to make decisions about what to wear and not worry about what to wear, because you don't have to, like, you're limited already, so you don't have to waste much mental capacity on figuring out, does this match that? Like, it's a tie, it's some dress slacks, it's a jacket, and these are my shoes, and I polished them 3 months ago and they're still good enough to go, and that's it, right? So however, it might be that people like organizations that change a lot because it lets them explore different ways of being in that organization. And then, there could be other sub-themes as well. So this is nice because it's got, there's, fiddlesticks. It has, so this example has, there's a theme, there's a theme, and there's a theme. And then they've broken those themes into sub-themes. And so once these themes and sub-themes have been identified, so that each of these becomes a code, so these are codes, and then these sub-themes then become kind of subcodes under that. Actually, there's a couple of different ways to do it, but we'll leave it at that. What we have over here are questions. These are not research questions. These instead are interview questions. And so if we know that the literature says that jobs that allow people to use the skills that they have, and jobs that provide growth in the sense of you get to maybe add new skills or you develop new responsibilities, that if those are the kinds of jobs, if jobs with those aspects are often associated with being a good place to work, then we want to ask a question that helps us get at these. So the first question, let's start by telling us about your job. What do you do here, right? And so you can find out what they actually do, you can find out if there's a clear chain of command, and then with later, so here they tell you what you do, and then in later questions, so what aspects of the job appeal to you, it might be that one of the things people would say is, oh, well, those skills I talked about up here, like, I had none of those before I came here, and I still don't really have them. That would be kind of bad, I would think. So it might lead to somebody being disgruntled. But it also, people might say, look, I didn't used to have these skills and I had to develop them. And actually, I really like these skills. So, but anyway, these two questions sort of work with each other to provide data that helps you get at whether this is a good place to work. And they do that by helping you get answers to whether or not a job uses skills or, provides, in this case, aspects or, for growth. So provides opportunities for growth, as well as this second question, what aspects of the job appeal to you, also might tell you something about what they like or don't like about the job. And then, whether they are comfortable or uncomfortable with the organizational culture at that organization. This third question then is, did you expect this when you were hired? So here they're asking people to recall when they first got hired, and that can be a problem, asking people to recall things because people's memories change over time. Or in some cases they do. But in any case, did you expect this when you were hired? This kind of, it might be that you thought you were going to use all your skills and that actually you don't use any of them. So it could be that initially you thought, oh, they're going to use all my GIS skills or all my site location skills. And up here, let's start by telling us about your job. What do you do here? If all you do is answer the phone all day and act as like customer support or, something that you didn't sign up to do, there may be some, discrepancies between did you expect this when you were hired and, what was actually hired. Or I guess there wouldn't be discrepancies, that this would And you were asking here, all right, so for the things that you do, is that what you thought you were going to do when you got started? And then, here for this sub-theme, they didn't include anything. But the point is that these questions, as you move along them, they will provide probable responses or probable opportunities to see these codes in action. And so this is one of the nice things about doing deductive coding, even if you think it's a bit rigid, is that when you're writing your research proposal, you can say, okay, based on my lit review, I think I'm going to see X, Y, and Z. And how do I know if I'm seeing X? Oh, well, they'll probably say, this is a good location, or this is a bad location, or you want to break each of those sort of major themes. In this case, I'm thinking in terms of X, Y, and Z, which isn't super illustrative. You want to think of each of those as like a theme that then can be, it has sub-themes underneath it, and those sub-themes then can provide ideas for codes that you would expect to then be picked up on in your interview guide. And these are the questions that would be in your interview guide. So the set of questions you would ask in an interview. And so my recommendation is that you actually construct something like this when you're making your research proposal. And so you might include it as an appendix. If you do, it won't count against your page length. But even if you don't make it to put in your appendix, if you are going to use deductive coding, something like this can really help you explain why you are conducting your research the way you are conducting it, and what are the possible codes that you would find. Okay, so that reflects the research question. All right, and so these codes, they're necessarily shaped by the instruments. So in this case, you're using an interview guide. It might be that you have instead a coding sheet that you are using to code newspaper articles. And so by that, I mean, you're not interviewing people. Instead, and people then aren't responding to your questions. Instead, you are systematically going through newspaper articles about, I don't know, people's houses burning down, for instance, or what makes, people describing what makes a good place to work. And you're making sure that each of those codes then shows up in your instrument, and that you have a way to capture that code, or to sort of identify it, whether it's there or not. And with interviews, it's most easy to do this, but it might be instead that, if you were looking at newspaper articles, that over here you would have a different set of questions that are really, getting at describing the content of that article. So length maybe, or how long is the article? What is the tone of the article? When was it written? If you think the gender of the author is important, gender of author, how, and then other questions that you have about those newspaper articles that then could be used to find cases of these particular codes, whatever those happen to be. All right, that's probably confusing. Sorry. All right, so up there we have factors identified in the literature. So basically, this means, what do we think we're going to find based on what the literature review tells us? So the point here is your instruments, they should be shaped by your literature review if you are using deductive coding. I would argue they should always be shaped, whether it's inductive or deductive. They should be shaped by your lit review, but definitely that should be in the case of deductive. I could occasionally see cases where that doesn't make sense for inductive coding, but also that reflects my personal kind of position on this stuff. So somebody else might disagree. Alrighty. So we've gone through this. Where I feel Spickard lets us down when he's showing us this table is that he doesn't show us how he might describe data, and not just describe, but analyze data about relationships between people. So like workers and bosses, or workers and their coworkers, or workers and customers, or workers and clients, or bosses and customers, or bosses and regulators, and workers and regulators. So he doesn't talk about ways to describe these relationships, though granted that is a bit of a picky thing to ask for. What he could have used is something called social network analysis, or SNA. And social network analysis builds on network theory. And actually, for this part of the lecture, this is when you want to look at the week 7 handout that is on the Sakai page, because this will provide us a couple of examples, 2 different systems, if you will, that can be examined for, I guess where we can describe systematically the relationships that exist in those systems or networks. And looking at the glossary in the index, I do not see social network analysis. Yep, social surveys, no social network analysis, which is fine. Let's, though, talk a bit about this. So social network analysis is one way to use something called graph theory. As an undergraduate, I encountered graph theory in transportation geography courses. And it's, in a way, it's basically a form of something called applied topology, which is a branch of mathematics. But we can still use it to think about qualitative data. It's also, I've seen since then, I've seen it used in watershed research to describe systems. And the nice thing about social network analysis is that it allows us, because remember, we're being analytical, so we're breaking something down into what we think are its important parts. And in this case, in social network analysis, the important thing is the relation or the connection between 2, the fancy term is nodes, but they might be people or they might be locations. They could be turtles, if we were studying like social networks among turtles. They could be lots of things. They can be nodes on the internet, right? So let's go on to the next slide. This is where an example would be handy to illustrate social network analysis, or some of the kind of basic components of it. You will recall that on the week 7 Sakai page, there is a link that says, sort of below this, the link to this lecture, that link says something like week 7 scenario handout or something like that. It may have the word social network analysis in it as well. But so you want to get that handout on the week 7 Sakai page and open it up, and because that is useful supplemental material. It covers things that I might mean to say but also space out and don't say because I go off on a tangent. But once you have that, let's come back and we're going to ask about, so our research question is, it might be, what is the geography of romance in a dorm? That might be one way to get out of it. Or what is even the geography of unrequited love? So unrequited love is like when you like someone, but they don't like you back. That is unrequited love right there. And the nice thing, the useful thing about social network and analysis is that it allows us to take some kind of system. So it could be a bunch of students on a particular floor of a dorm, or maybe in the entire dorm, or even the entire university, but let's keep it manageable and just stick with like the third floor of a given dorm. And it allows us to take that system that consists of these people, which we can think of as nodes. So they're the residents, the people that live on that floor. And each of those persons is a node. And they also happen to have a location. So we could actually think of their dorm rooms as a node as well. So we might even just remove people from it. And because it could be that we're interested in, if you are neighbors with somebody, are you more likely or less likely to, to feel unrequited love towards them? So, and I'm supposing that, I suppose these could be same-sex dorms. They could be, co-ed dorms. It doesn't really matter to me. So in this case, though, we then have these, we can identify linkages or connections in the sense that one person likes another person and is not liked back. So let's kind of go on with there. So we could basically treat all of these, if you want to call them romantic entanglements, as an interconnected system. And for this system, we're going to start with, maybe it's during COVID-19 and only 3 people live on that dorm floor, or maybe more people live on it. But let's just say this argument, in this case, in this example, there's only 3 people that live on that floor. And so we've got Sam, who yearns for Shannon's embrace, Shannon, who in turn pines for Hunter's affections, just sort of stays up all night till 2 or 3 in the morning, just pining away. And then Hunter dreams only of Sam's soft caress. So from these words alone, we can make a connectivity table that show these relationships of unrequited love. And the way we're going to do that is make use of something called graph theory, or at least components of graph theory. So one way that you can analyze sort of hidden systems in your data is to make a graph of it. But graph, you'll notice here it has an asterisk next to it. Graph has a particular meaning in this case. And so in this case, it's really more like a drawing that shows lines between points. And this graph reveals the connections or the linkages, or sometimes these are called relationships, or in some cases relations, between the various parts or the nodes. So in our case, the nodes are people living on the 3rd floor, and the relationships are, that this person likes that person. What it does, or what it allows us to see, what we can abstract out of this, is that it reveals which nodes have higher centrality, which is a fancy word for it has more links in the system. So it might be that there's somebody, on a floor who's like super scrumptious, and there are all kinds of people that like that person. But that person may only like, 1 or 2 other people. And so in that case, the super scrumptious person, whoever they are, would have a really high measure of centrality. Furthermore, what's really helpful about using graph theory is that it allows us to indicate not only that there is or isn't a relationship, so that in our example, it's going to be that this person likes that person, but we can also identify whether those relationships are symmetrical or directional. So person A likes person B. Does person B like person A back? If they do, then that's symmetrical. So whereas directional means that it just goes in one direction, or that link, that relation only flows in one direction. And so on top of that, we could have, in addition to whether the relation is that the person A likes person B, we could also use ratio level data to say how much do they like person, how much does person A like person B. So, and in this case, we're starting to move into quantitative research, but this kind of underscores how these boundaries can be a bit blurry at times. So So we might say, it's ratio level or even just ordinal. You could have a survey where, you send everybody a survey. You have the name of everyone that's on their floor and whether they like them or not, and then ask them to rank how much they like them, from 1 to whatever. And by like in this case, I mean like them in a romantic sense. So though you could actually just have like in a general sense, right? Because that might be interesting to see. And so with ordinal data, you don't know if, a 2 is not stronger than a 3, it's just higher. Whereas with ratio data, like a 2 is basically, it's 2 units from whatever 0 is, whereas 3 is 3 units from whatever 0 is. And so a 3 is, stronger by a particular increment. But we'll come to that later. I'm getting ahead of myself. So with this triangle of unrequited love, we've got this, we're imagining not a transportation system, not, the internet as a system of parts that are all connected together, but instead we're imagining this 3rd floor of a dorm as a location in which we see a system of romances unfold. And in particular, it's unrequited love that we're observing. So we've got Sam. Sam is totally, yearns for Shannon's embrace. Shannon pines for Hunter's affections. So right there, you see a problem. Sam likes Shannon. Shannon, however, likes Hunter. And then Hunter, in turn, dreams only of Sam's soft caresses. So here you have, I always think of this New Order song, Bizarre Love Triangle, but I'm not sure if this is technically a bizarre love triangle, but you have kind of a love triangle here. So each person likes somebody else, and they all like each other together. So I guess if they're into menage a trois, that works as well, right? So, but if they are more traditional, that may not work for them. So from these words alone, we can then make a network diagram and a connectivity table that show these relationships. And because we get to draw, that is one of the things I really like about this. With this diagram, we see, actually it's a graph. With this graph, we see a system of unrequited love. So it's not the Bermuda Triangle, it's like the 3rd floor triangle, if you will. And in this triangle, we see that Sam, who's here, and we could also give this just a number, and then right over here, 1 is Sam. For this could be number 2, and then Hunter could be number 3, and we could write those over here. In more complicated or more busy with more nodes, you might want to do that, but for our purposes, this works. So we see that Sam likes Shannon. Shannon likes Hunter, and Hunter likes Sam. And what this shows us then, if we know that these arrows mean that the person where the arrow originates, so in this case here we've got Hunter, so that Hunter, because the arrow starts at Hunter, it originates at Hunter, and its destination or its endpoint is Sam, that conveys that, this notion that they like. So Hunter likes Sam. And it means likes for us because that's what we're talking about. Likewise, Shannon, the connection there, likes Hunter. And this one, Sam likes Shannon. So the nice thing about this diagram is that, we don't have to know like what Sam looks like or how tall Sam is or how short Hunter is or what anybody's major is or even what room they're in. We just know that, they are in this system, and the thing that we are interested in is who do they like. And in this, we see that, oh, wow, they each like somebody, but unfortunately, that person doesn't like them back. So that's what this graph, so I'll put it over here. So G-R-A-P-H. And so this comes out of graph theory. That's why it's called graph theory. that's what this represents. In addition to using a graph like we saw on the previous slide, so remember a directed graph, I suppose is the proper name, we can also use a connectivity table like this to represent that same information. So what I like about a graph is that I work well with images in the sense that I process information really well that way. The problem with that is that computers may not. And one of the benefits of using a connectivity table, so here is an example of a connectivity table. And they'll have other names sometimes too. But this connectivity table contains the same information as that directed graph we just looked at. And what it tells us is, who's the object of affection up here, and who feels the unrequited love. One way I like to think about this as somebody who originally learned about social network analysis from transportation geography is to think that, feels unrequited love, this is basically the origin for that relation. So, who is the person who likes somebody else? Origin. So the origin is the person, is the node that has a connection with, a relation with, that we're recording with another person, right? The object of affection, which if we think in transportation geography terms, we can think of as a destination, right? This will help make one of the later examples a bit more clear. And so what we see here is that Sam, we are assuming, it's entirely possible, you've probably all met people who like themselves more than they like anybody else. We're going to assume, though, that romantic love is probably, at least in this system, that it has to be directed outward. It's not directed at yourself. You cannot romantically love yourself. Get your mind out of the gutter. All right. So Sam can't like himself romantically. Shannon likewise can't like his or herself romantically, and Hunter also can't like him or herself romantically. And I should actually say that Sam could be a him or a her as well. So, because it doesn't actually matter in this system. So we're not recording people's gender or sexual orientation. That you could do something like that as well to kind of complicate your network. All right. So these are the diagonal. And so we've got it set up so the diagonal has no connections. So that basically, in this case, you can't be romantically interested in yourself. Which, sounds kind of dorky, but is a useful property that when you look at a connectivity table, you want to try to figure out, does it allow self-connectivity or not? Right. It then tells us, okay, this is who feels the unrequited love. So Sam can't feel love for Sam, or romantic love, but can for Shannon, but doesn't. So does for Shannon, but doesn't for Hunter. And so in this case, we get a 1 here to indicate the presence of that feeling, right? Whereas here, Hunter, so Sam has no romantic feelings towards Hunter. Likewise, Shannon, and actually, now that I'm thinking about it, even calling it unrequited love is like by definition, the system has to be set up this way. So, because unrequited love is means that the other person doesn't like you back. So, but we'll move on. So Shannon doesn't feel warm, gushy feelings for Sam. We're not, we're assuming people cannot love themselves romantically. And also, but we do then see that Shannon feels the feels for Hunter. And then Hunter, pines or whatever it was for Sam, not Shannon, and again, not for themselves. So this is a way to then represent what we just saw on the previous table. And the benefit of this is that it can then be plugged into a spreadsheet, which is kind of nice. At the same time, when you have this information, then you can also go back and draw the directed graph that we saw on the previous slide. In this case, these links, or the relationships, if you will, are asymmetrical. It's unrequited love. One person, person A likes person B, but it is not reciprocated. If it were reciprocated, then it would be symmetrical. And actually then our arrows there would be arrows on both ends of our directed graph lines. So what this means is that these relations, they have a direction. So that if they're asymmetrical, that means they have a direction. In addition to looking at systems of romance, we can also use graph theory to think about connections between places. In this case, and this is one of the first examples I ever saw as an undergraduate, I'm not actually sure where this map is of, but what we see up here at the top is the top-down view of some buildings. So each of these kind of brownish rectangles or polygons is a building, and the white area are presumed to be streets. With that in mind, we can say that this sort of wedge is a street plan with the surrounding blocks. So it might be that these are buildings, or they might actually be blocks that have, different pieces of property on them. I like to think of them actually as like buildings. Each is its own building. That also comes from drawing maps like this when I was a teenager and played Dungeons and Dragons. So I still play Dungeons and Dragons, but I just don't draw maps like that anymore. Anyway, that urban plan can then be simplified into this funky looking diagram, well, actually this funky looking graph beneath it, where each green point, or each node, and you'll notice over here that nodes are actually vertices. I wrongly called linkages vertices earlier. Actually, I should have said edge. So a node is the circle, or in the dorm room example, these were people. In this case, though, each of these nodes kind of refers to, well, fiddlesticks, refers to a location in this neighborhood. And in particular, it seems to be referring to intersections or open spaces. And where I'm drawing little green circles at the top should correspond to what's going on down here. So we have this circle here that corresponds to the one up here in this big open area. We've got a circle here which gets at the intersection of this street and whatever the street that runs roughly east-west is. This circle here corresponds to this one up here. This node corresponds to this node over here. This node corresponds to this node. And then So we've done that. We know there's a node here, and you'll even see that it kind of curves a little bit. So that suggests that there's some kind of curvature in that path. So that comes down to this one over here. So that one's a bit, we don't actually in real life see that kind of curve. Maybe we do. But we've got a node. Hold on. Let's go back. So we don't actually have a node right there because all of this area here is part of this plaza. I imagine it's a plaza, like a marketplace or something like that in a European city. And so we don't have a node there, but we do have a node here. This corresponds to this one down here. We've got a node there. And we have a node here in this little alley. So this bit right here corresponds to up here. This node corresponds to this intersection. And then we must have one there as well. Yep, so there's that one, there's that one. And this gives you then an idea of how these nodes are selected. So in this case, these nodes are intersections of streets or otherwise areas through which maybe people or bicycles or even cars might move. And then we connect. So basically, if from this area, if we call it the marketplace, if I can sort of, move I guess the nearest locations or the nearest intersections are, I move kind of over here. I can also move there. So the nearest adjacent intersections are like this, right? There's the one kind of over here. And then, so for each of these, you identify who is its adjacent neighbor. That's supposed to be like that, right? Yeah. And basically that's how these are drawn. They can get kind of messy, and sometimes there's software that can help you control the placement of these. But what's nice about them is that it helps us, it sort of simplifies the structure of what we're seeing. So if we're being analytical, if we're looking for like the core or the foundational or the most important parts of something, and if what we're interested in this case is transportation, then this graph tells us about, which locations, which nodes are most likely, are likely to have the most traffic. Because, the ones that are connected to the most other adjacent places are the ones that are probably likely to have the most traffic. Oh, hold on. And in this case, these links or these relationships, they're symmetrical. So even though this graph doesn't draw arrows, they do show, the assumption in this case is that if you can, go to this place right here to go to there, then you can go back again. That's not always the case if you had a system that included one-way streets, right? So if you're in a car and you're like where I grew up in Bloomington, Indiana, actually didn't grow up there, like went to university there for a while. In that place where I lived for a while, people were often confounded by the numerous one-way streets. And so in that case, it would be useful then to indicate directionality. For this map, we can show directionality, or for this graph, we can show directionality also just by adding arrows. Like this, what I'm doing here. So this is assuming that if you can get to a place, if you can get to place A from place B, then you can get to place B from place A. So it's assuming symmetry. And one way we could show that is then by making these edges or these connections. We could, put directional arrows on them with an arrowhead in each direction. So. One more thing about this is that these linkage diagrams, these graphs, are useful for helping us see, and actually once you convert this graph into a connectivity table, helping you calculate, they actually tell us things like which location or which node, because these are nodes technically, which node is connected to the most other nodes. So which node has the most links, L-I-N-K-S, and it's this one right here. It's connected to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we could see. So in the previous map, we saw that there was one location that had, or actually it wasn't a map, in the previous graph, there was a location that had the highest centrality. So that was the node that was connected to the most other nodes, and its measure of centrality was a 7 in that case. So we're not going to go into other sort of numerical ways to talk about networks, but it's useful just to do it that way. I guess the only one we're really going to talk about is centrality. So centrality refers to the node that has the most linkages with other nodes. And then you can sort of have, rankings of centrality as well. With that in mind, we can take a map of the Niagara region, and if you look on page 6, I believe it is, of your map, or sorry, of your handout, you'll see a map. It shows Niagara region municipal boundaries, and I'm going to show you sort of how to convert this into a connectivity table. So here's our map, and all we have to do is, well, first we're going to assume that there's symmetrical linkages, right? If it's symmetrical, that means Grimsby to Lincoln, that box gets a 1, and Lincoln to Grimsby, that box would get a 1 as well on the connectivity table. So Grimsby and Lincoln are connected. West Lincoln and Grimsby are connected. West Lincoln and Lincoln are connected. West Lincoln and Pelham are connected. West Lincoln and Waynflete, they are connected. Pelham and Waynflete are connected because they border each other, right? Lincoln and Pelham are connected. St. Catharines and Lincoln are connected. St. Catharines and Thorold are connected. Welland and Thorold are connected. Pelham and Thorold are connected. And by that I mean they have, so in this case, connected means they have borders that are not just corners, so that where they touch, it's not just touching at a corner. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. Pelham is connected to Welland, Port Colborne to Welland, Port Colborne to Fort Erie to Niagara Falls to Niagara-on-the-Lake, St. Catharines to Niagara-on-the-Lake, Thorold to Niagara Falls, Welland to Niagara Falls. I believe those are all of the connections right now. In this instance, where Niagara-on-the-Lake, St. Catharines, Niagara Falls, and Thorold come together, there's a corner. We could say that corners count as connections or not. In this particular instance, we're not. And the point there, so this means that St. Catharines and Niagara Falls don't share a border, and that Thorold and Niagara-on-the-Lake don't share a border. Right? So is Niagara Falls connected to St. Catharines? I mean, they're close to each other, but if we, and what you want to do when you're developing a network analysis is you want to think about what are the rules that you're going to use and use those consistently. So if there has to be an actual boundary that connects and not just a corner, then you have to apply that to all of your cases. In a way, then this makes it like deductive coding. And, is Thorold connected to Niagara-on-the-Lake? We also want to think about that. And in this particular instance, I'm going to say, no, it is not, that because we are going to consistently apply the rule of we code as a connection, because this is actually a kind of coding, that we are coding for a connection only in cases where more than a corner meets. And with that in mind, we can now start to work through this Niagara connectivity table. So we're going to assume that corners only don't count as adjacent, and we're also going to assume that the relations between nodes are symmetrical, so that they're non-directional. So that if I can travel from Thorold to St. Catharines, then I can also then travel from St. Catharines to Thorold. And what we do next is then start to fill in all of these cells. So let's just start over here. So this is Grimsby. So GR stands for Grimsby on your map. That's the location that's basically right next to Hamilton. So what we can do first is simply look at Grimsby. So Grimsby has exactly two neighbors. It has Lincoln and it has West Lincoln as neighbors. Nobody else is on the border. No other location is on the border of Grimsby. This means that on this little table, what we do is, let me see if my pen's working. Oh, come on, you blasted thing. Oh, no wonder. What this means is that we are in Grimsby. So Grimsby is not going to be connected with itself, but it is connected, borders Lincoln, right? Grimsby also borders West Lincoln, which is WL over here, right? So we basically can go down like this. And then all of the rest of these cells get 0 because there's no connection. So Port Colborne and Grimsby do not share a boundary. Thorold and Grimsby don't share a boundary. Pelham and Grimsby don't share a boundary. WF is Waynfleet. It does not share a boundary either. And yeah, so just to make it clear for people who are using the table at home, if we go down the left-hand side, GR is Grimsby, LINC, L-I-N-C, is Lincoln, SC is St. Catharines, NOTL is Niagara-on-the-Lake, NF is Niagara Falls, FE is not Iron, but Fort Erie. So PC is not a computer, it is Port Colborne. That is located sort of between Fort Erie and Waynfleet. See, so Port Colborne. Well is Welland. So that's located on the Welland Canal. It's a way to remember that. Between Port Colborne and Thorold. Pell, P-E-L, is Pelham, or Pelham, as I like to call it. WL is West Lincoln, and WF is Waynfleet. So that's what those acronyms stand for. With that in mind, oh, there's one more thing that we can do. For this column, remember columns go up and down, they hold up buildings. Rows are like rows in a lecture hall. They kind of go left and right. And okay, so this funky sign right here is called a sigma. So Greek letter, capital sigma. And it just means the sum of that column. So Grimsby is connected to 2 locations. We just put a 2 in there. And then we go back to Lincoln and repeat. So Lincoln, we see, has Grimsby, no, fiddlesticks, come back here. Yeah, Lincoln has Grimsby as a neighbor. It has St. Catharines as a neighbor. It has, does not have Niagara-on-the-Lake as a neighbor. Niagara-on-the-Lake is over by the Niagara River. Doesn't have Niagara Falls. Doesn't have Fort Erie. Does not have Port Colborne. Does not have Welland. does not have Thorold, but it does border Pelham. It does not border Welland, but it does border Wainfleet. Nope, doesn't border Wainfleet either. Hold on. That's a mistake on my part. Hold on. We already did Welland up here. My bad. All right. So WL is West Lincoln, so it does actually border West Lincoln. And it does not border Wainfleet when I look at the map. And so 1, 2, 3, 4. The nice thing about drawing this on the map is that it's often easier to kind of see the connections. But I refer back to my map, and indeed Lincoln does have 1, 2, 3, 4 neighbors. So I put a 4 here, which we would also get just by adding 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. St. Catharines, let's go up here, does not border Grimsby. It does border Lincoln. And here, looky here, so St. Catharines, sorry, kind of going about this in a weird way, but so I'm starting with the destinations and then going to the origins, but it's fine as long as I'm consistent. So basically, St. Catharines and Lincoln are connected, and St. Catharines and Lincoln are connected. So because these are symmetrical, that's fine. Also, Lincoln and Grimsby, and so here we've got Grimsby and Lincoln, and then here we've got Lincoln and Grimsby, and those have 1s. Those symmetrical. We should see that as well. All right, so Niagara-on-the-Lake is not connected to St. Catharines because we are not counting corners. Niagara Falls, oh, sorry, my bad. Got this reversed. So Niagara-on-the-Lake is bordering St. Catharines. Niagara Falls does not because we're not counting just corners. Port Erie does not. Port Colborne does not. Welland does not. Thorold does. Pelham actually does. West Lincoln does not. And Wainfleet does not. Let me just make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, so there should be 4. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep. So if I add up each of these, so 1, 1, 1, and 1, that gives me a 4. All right. Now I go to Niagara-on-the-Lake. NOTL, so Niagara-on-the-Lake. Does it border Grimsby? Nope. Does it border Lincoln? Nope. Does it border St. Catharines? Yes. And again, there we have some symmetry, right? So St. Catharines borders Niagara-on-the-Lake. Niagara-on-the-Lake borders St. Catharines. That's good. So Niagara-on-the-Lake, does it border Niagara Falls? Yes, it does. Share. The southern border of Niagara-on-the-Lake is the same as the northern border of Niagara Falls. Fort Erie does not share a border. Port Colborne does not share a border. Welland, nope. Thorold, nope, because we're not counting. We do not count in this instance corners. Pelham, nope. Well, Wainfleet, nope. Oh, sorry, not Wainfleet. West Lincoln, no. And Wainfleet, no. All right. We add those up, and we get a 2. So measure of centrality is 2 for Niagara-on-the-Lake. We go to Niagara Falls, and I'm working through this tediously just so you can see how the table gets filled out. So Niagara Falls, is it connected to Grimsby? Nope, they're on opposite sides of the map. It's supposed to be a 0, not a 6. Make that a 0, okay. Is Niagara Falls, does it border Lincoln? Nope. Does Niagara Falls border St. Catharines? Nope, because we are not counting diagonals. Does Niagara Falls border Niagara-on-the-Lake? Yes. So that's a 1. Does it border Fort Erie? Yes, it does. Fort Erie is to the south of Niagara Falls. Port Colborne? Actually, it does. Yep. Welland? It does. Thorold? It does. Pelham? Nope. It does not. And West Lincoln, no, and Waynflete, no. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So Niagara Falls has a centrality of 5, which so far makes it the place with the highest centrality in Niagara using these definitions. Fort Erie, what do we see about Fort Erie? So it's basically across the river from Detroit, not Detroit, sorry, wrong, edge of Ontario from Buffalo. So Fort Erie is not anywhere near Grimsby or Lincoln or St. Catharines or Niagara on the Lake, but it does border Niagara Falls, and it does border Port Colborne. It does not border Welland or Thorold or Pelham or West Lincoln or Waynflete. So Fort Erie has a 2 for centrality. Port Colborne does not border Grimsby, does not border Lincoln, does not border St. Catharines, does not border Niagara on the Lake. I mean, those 3 are basically, they run along the top of the map. What about Niagara Falls? It does, right? So Port Colborne does share a border with Niagara Falls, does share a border with Fort Erie. It does share a border with Welland. It does not share a border with Thorold. Does not share a border with Pelham. It does share a border with, does not share a border with West Lincoln, but it does with Waynflete. So there we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 4, a measure of centrality of 4 there. For Welland, we have, so it does not border Grimsby, does not border Lincoln, does not border St. Catharines. Oops, I erased something. Hold on, let me put that up there. It does not border Niagara on the Lake. It does, so Welland and Niagara Falls share a border. Welland and Fort Erie do not share a border. Welland and Port Colborne share a border. Thorold and Welland share a border. No, why does it do that? Okay. Pelham and Welland share a border. Waynflete actually does share a border. Sorry, I keep getting this mixed up. West Lincoln and this, so Welland and West Lincoln do not share a border, but Welland and Waynflete do share a border. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right there. That's supposed to be a 5. Looks hideous. Let me fix it. Looks more like a snake. 5. Okay. And let's go to Thorold. So Thorold does not border Grimsby. Thorold does not border Lincoln. Thorold does border St. Catharines. Thorold does not, because we're not counting corners, does not border Niagara on the Lake. Thorold does border Niagara Falls, does not border Fort Erie, does not border Port Colborne, does border Welland. It does border Pelham, but it does not border West Lincoln, nor does it border Waynflete. So we get 1, 2, 3, 4. So according to my calculations, there, so 1, 2, 3, 4. So centrality for Thorold is 4. So far it looks like Welland and Niagara Falls are the places with the highest centrality if we are just counting borders. So for Pelham, what do we have? So Pelham does not border Grimsby. Pelham does border Lincoln, does border St. Catharines, does not border Niagara on the Lake, does not border Niagara Falls, does not border Fort Erie, does not border Port Colborne, does border Welland, does border Thorold, does border West Lincoln, and Waynflete. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So Pelham, if we're using borders to count this, shared borders, has the highest centrality. West Lincoln, bear with me, we're almost done. So West Lincoln has who as its neighbor? It has Grimsby. Grimsby's kind of north of it. It has Lincoln. Does not have St. Catharines. Does not have Niagara-on-the-Lake. Does not have Niagara Falls. Does not have Fort Erie. Does not have Port Colborne. Does not have Welland. Does not have Thorold. Does have Pelham. It does have Waynflete. So 1, 2, 3, 4. There. And finally, West, sorry, that's not West. Waynflete. There's a problem with using a W. So Waynflete, WF, does not border Grimsby, does not border Lincoln, does not border St. Catharines, does not border Niagara-on-the-Lake, does not border Niagara Falls, does not border Fort Erie, does border Port Colborne, does border Welland, does not border Thorold, does border Pelham, and does border West Lincoln. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. Right. A thing that we should see also is that when we sum each of these rows, we should get the same number that we see. So the Grimsby column is 2. The Grimsby row should also be 2. Let's add that together. Yep, there's just 2 in there. In this one, so the Lincoln row is 1, 2, 3, 4 is 4. So we would hope that the column is this. Yep, okay. And they're the same in the number of borders that are shared because there is symmetry. Looks like for St. Catharines, there are 4. Nice thing about doing this when there's symmetry is that if you have a really big table, it makes it easier to catch mistakes. So 1, 2, so there's 2 for Niagara-on-the-Lake. Yep. Niagara Falls, I think they had 5. So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep. Fort Erie has 1, 2. Port Colborne has 1, 2, 3, 4. Welland has 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep. Is that consistent? Nah, that's not consistent. Hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, sorry. Zoned out there. So that should be 5. And so 1, 2, 3, 4. So Port Colborne should be 4. Yep. Okay. Thorold should be 1, 2, 3, 4. So we got 4 there. We got 4 there. So that looks good. 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got 4 for Pelham. For West Lincoln, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. And for Waynflete, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4. All right. Let me go back here. So 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 6. All right, I did something wrong for Pelham. Let's go back. And so Pelham coming down the column for Pelham says 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. So why doesn't this one say 6? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, because I forgot them. Now, there are ways, if your polygons are in a GIS, where you can get tables like this automatically generated. So this gives you an idea of how they're created. So we don't really need, for our purposes, we're not going to calculate the sum of the. This then is a demonstration of how you can use, I guess, how you can build or fill out a connectivity table and then use it to look for locations with the highest connectivity. There's other things we could do as well, but we're going to call it a day at this.